afternoon to you, St. Lucia. Thank you so much for making the time off for you to join us live from the studios of the National Television Network Government Information Service. I am Lisa Joseph, not the Lone Ranger today like I was yesterday. As I informed you, we'll be having over the next 2 days discussion on something that, you know, we've grown up talking about it. We've heard our parents, grandparents, the nurses and doctors talk about salt intake. But the conversation always, for certain, surrounds just hypertension. So today we want to go a bit further beyond that. And we'll be having a sort of mini medical class so that we can begin to really understand the issues, everything surrounding salt. Because St. Lucia, as I told you yesterday, we're joining in on the global observance for Salt Awareness Week. That week is from the 14th to the 20th of March. And we are being asked to shake the habit. So we'll be doing a lot of shaking today. Now, to get a little context into that, we've known for some time that too much salt, as I said, can harm our health. We've heard it from all quarters. And then there are unnecessary deaths that are associated with that. You have heart attacks, there's strokes, other conditions as well. So we want to really focus in on, you know, whether it is just the issue of salt reduction, is it that we do a complete elimination? All of those questions will be answered. But I want to tell you that within the global community, the United Kingdom had taken on this. They had pledged to really take on the matter of sodium salt. And they had found that in order for them to really tackle this, you have to tackle the food industry. That is where the problem lies. Now, we are not as big as the United Kingdom to do so. And so it really now lies on consumer education in order for us to see some achievements, like some results of what the UK would have had with its population. So here to discuss all of those matters with me is the very wonderful Dr. Isaac. Thank you so much for coming in, Dr. Jenny Isaac. And right now I said we're having a mini medical class today. And I could see the corner of my eye, she was nodding and smiling because we know it's going to be one that's going to be very eye-opening. Now, I was talking about, you know, Salt Awareness Week there. I'd never heard of it. So tell us about how and when did St. Lucia and the Caribbean become part of this?
I'm like you. This is the first year that we are really actually participating in Salt Awareness Week, as far as I know. And ecstatic about it that finally we looking at salt intake. And it's not just the salt that we usually think of, shaking extra salt onto the food after it's cooked and adding it when it's been cooked, but we're also looking at hidden salts. So one of the main things that I want to clarify to everybody is that when we talk about salt, and we throw that word around very loosely, and I apologize in advance for probably using the wrong term in between while we're having the interview. But what we really need to focus on is our sodium intake. So salt is like table salt, 90% of where we get our sodium from, but it's not the only source of sodium that we get. And it is actually the sodium and not the table salt that is a problem.
So why is sodium? Because are the two not the same?
No, it's not. So you have sodium chloride, which is table salt. And sodium is a compound. So for instance, you have a cluster of grapes and the cluster we call salt. And it's made up of the grape, which is sodium, let's call that, or building blocks, for instance. So the red building blocks are the sodium, and then the chloride is green. You have various types of sodium being taken into your diet that does not have the green-red combination. So you'd have the green sodium and red chloride, or you'd have green sodium and blue glutamate, and you'd have green sodium with other compounds. Some of them are multiple sodium compounds. So you have one green block or two green blocks or three green blocks. If our lovely gentleman Miguel can bring up the first image with the list of salts, we can see that there are certain types of salt that we are with, right? So you have pink Himalayan salt, and everybody thinks some types of salt are healthier than others. Your say sodium, all of them is sodium. When it gets into your body reads sodium.
Yeah. Okay.
So you have pink Himalayan salt and kosher salt and rock salt. Some of them are very expensive. Then we look at things like sodium bicarbonate that we don't think of as salt, which is the baking soda we use in our biscuits and breads as leavening agents. So these have sodium as well. And then you have, there was this rave a few years ago how monosodium glutamate is so bad, and people put no MSG in this product and no MSG in this product because of the sodium it has in it. But then if you look down your label, you'll actually see things like disodium and trisodium, and all of these are types of sodium that are hidden in our foods. You don't taste it, you don't smell it. It's hidden in there as preservatives that when we put it into our body, our cells read it as sodium, and so it will react to it in the same manner as table salt.
While you're there, let's emphasize a little bit more about the MSG, because as you said, the rave was that it is so horrible, so terrible. There are issues with the MSG.
Yes.
But in context to the salt, there is the school of thought that it's actually better than having perhaps the table salt.
Well, that's the thing. Remember I told you the building blocks, with one green building block or two green building blocks, and then the other blocks that would make it the different types of salts and give it different flavors. So we use sodium chloride all the time, table salt. Monosodium glutamate has just one green block, so that's one block of sodium that your body would be taking in when you consume something with MSG. You have things like the disodium isocyanate that gives even scientists difficulty to say the name, but it's in our food.
I don't know how you'll get through med school, just letting you know. It's okay.
But the disodium, with all the fancy names, what it simply means is that instead of one green building block like the MSG, it has two green building blocks. And so then your body has double the amount of sodium to deal with. So MSG got a really bad rap because people start noticing, hey, it's still sodium, but the food industry has managed to kind of hide the others, the trisodiums and disodiums, and who's to know if there's not a pentasodium, penta being 5. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, I'm just a doctor.
Yeah, but and if it's giving you difficulty, for us as consumers, and we have absolutely no medical training, reading labels is even a problem. You do not know anything that's on there. So we have to get into a little later on how we are able now to decipher all of these things. Now, when we speak about the table salt, we can see that, you know, we add it in our cooking and so forth.
Right.
You've spoken about the, you know, hidden in the foods. But how do we really tell that there's sodium? Is sodium in every food?
When you start talking about processed foods, things that you buy on a shelf, something that has a label, most likely it has sodium in it.
Why would that be?
Because in the whole process, sodium is added, forms of sodium is added for preserving purposes, for sterilization purposes. So it's being used for a good purpose. It's to allow us to be able to consume the meals without getting sick, right? But then you have things that are zero sodium. So for instance, where's my list of examples? I have here 1 cup of white rice, and this is if you cook your rice with no added salt, has 0 sodium because this is whole food. So once you start talking about whole foods, yes, you do find some 0 sodium items.
And that's irrespective of the rice, whether it's that bleached white rice or
white rice.
White rice.
So white jasmine, white basmati, white rice, 0 sodium. You have all of your spices and your herbs and your dried garlic and those things, all of those powders that are not salted. There is Mrs. Dash,
which is quite popular.
Which is very popular because they pride themselves on zero sodium, because what they do, they dry all of those whole foods and the whole spices, they dry it and grind it down to make a powder and add it in without adding any extra salt or sodium. So there are zero sodium foods out there. The easy way to know that you have very little sodium is if you go whole foods instead of processed foods. Very easy. But we will talk about the label.
Yes, we'll talk about the label. So when you have those added, where the sodium is already built in, let's just say it's built in, is it wise for you now to simply cook without adding any of our table salt to it?
One of the habits that we try to encourage, I don't think I'm the only physician who does it in the clinics, we try to encourage the patients to cook with less salt over a period of time. Salt makes food taste different. Now, for somebody who does not consume a lot of salt, when you put salt in the food, all they taste is the salt. You don't get the taste of the food. Like, I don't know what's the percentage of families with somebody who's hypertensive. So my father became hypertensive when I was much younger. And so my mother started cutting down on the salt from when I was probably 11 years old. And so now I don't cook with salt because I'm aware that it comes with the food. So breadfruit, potatoes, sweet plantains, yams, dashintanya, all these things. When I cook these things, some of them I don't boil, I steam them to preserve the nutrients. I don't add salt. When somebody adds salt to those things, I don't taste the food. You just eat salt. So for some people, the salt gives it the taste, but you kind of have to undo it very slowly, so you reduce it. And what we would ask patients to do is when you're cooking, you know you're supposed to consume one teaspoon of salt for your entire day. 1 teaspoon. So you add that 1 teaspoon into a little cup, and you mix it in, and then you add some of that cup of water into your peas, into your meat, into your provision, into your rice, so you know you shed that 1 teaspoon across everything. That way, you would probably consume less, a little more than what you're supposed to consume, but less than what you would have usually consumed if you just added a pinch in everything. Yes. I'm
taking that in for a moment. I'm taking that in yes. Because lots of people, because the idea is to really get that flavor out, and it's to just get the flavor.
Spices.
And so spices are the alternative to salt.
That's right. And there's zero sodium, and healthy and antioxidants. So use your tiloyon, your onion, and your shadow beni, and your little mince, your basil, the bois-d'Inde. Use those things to flavor up your rosemary. Use those things to flavor up your foods and cut down on the salt. And it's a whole new world of flavor.
My mother is loving you right now. That's how she cooks.
Okay.
So she's loving you right now. And I'm hoping that all of the other mummies out there are taking note of that, because for the children, they're not making those dietary choices, and children, once you introduce them, now it becomes the preferred, and then you find that you have to constantly feed that preference.
Yes.
So in terms of children, how should we manage their salt intake? Because I grew up hearing, well, Eugène, ça pas for 1 year. You're young, you're like 5 years old, it's okay, you'll go out, you'll run, and you'll burn it off. How do we deal with children? Then we'll come into the adults, and then we'll get into hypertension issues.
So many studies have been done, and you'd find that children are actually more salt sensitive than people like me and you. The good thing is, when you sweat, your body gets rid of sodium in the sweat. So that last part is true, you run out and you burn it. You drink water and you run and you sweat, you burn it out. But children are actually more salt sensitive. Children and elderly are more salt sensitive than people in the middle age range, and blacks are more salt sensitive than whites. What I mean by salt sensitive is if you consume more than what is required, and what's required is the 1 teaspoon, then your blood pressure would tend to increase more rapidly than somebody else. So children, when they consume extra salt, their blood pressure would increase more rapidly, but their veins are young, their heart is young, they run around, they sweat. So we don't see the effects, but it is quite harmful to them, just the same. I'm guilty, boxed mac and cheese, which is terrible.
But as a working mother, we give you a pass. We understand.
Yes, but the other issue is when there's this phase that children go through, that a lot of parents, when we were growing through that phase, my parents would tell me, if you don't eat it, sleep by it. Yes. So I don't get off the table until I clean the plate. That has actually caused a problem for us, because during that phase, our body's actually trying to learn when I'm hungry, when I'm full, when do I need to eat, when don't I need to eat. And we are being told, eat or die, right? So with my girls, I've actually allowed them to have the freedom. I'm not hungry yet. That's too much, I don't want it. So that they can know when to stop eating, when to eat, when to have more water. Funny, true story. This week, all of a sudden, my daughter decides she likes ramen. Oh my goodness. So yesterday, after preparing the ramen for her, I told her, sweetheart, you always ask me to read the nutritional facts. And this is a 7-year-old child, so God bless Carmen Rennie for exposing the children to the food labels from very early. So I think from grade 1 for both of my girls, they were going through the food labels for them. So this one wants ramen. I said, okay, you had your ramen, you need to read the nutritional facts and tell mommy what it says. She came back, she said, I'm never eating this again. Mommy, that's way too much salt. So she understood yesterday why I would have never given it to her in the past. But I had the experience. I let her learn on her own. I let her read it and understand. So that's why I was telling you the food labels is something easy to catch on to, because I've seen that the teachers are doing it with the children, and it's just out of practice. And every time you pick up an item, you read the label. After a while, you get the hang of it.
If you can read the label.
If you could read the label.
Some of them are just not legible. I know that within CARICOM, there is the movement now to really ensure that consumers are able to see that it's quite legible, because they're saying that the print is so fine that you can't see that with your naked eye, even though you have 20/20 vision.
General
it's a problem.
You can't read it, don't buy it.
That's the general rule of thumb there. So we've taken care of the children. As you get older, I know you spoke about the one, it's the teaspoon that you need, just that 1 teaspoon. That's all your body requires.
That's all.
So as you get older, what happens if you fall out of that recommended volume?
Okay, the human body is an amazing machine, the best made ever. Right? Our body can tolerate really extremes of salt intake. So I'll change the number from 1 teaspoon to another group of numbers. So 1 teaspoon is the same as 2,000 milligrams, thereabout, 2,300 estimate. Our body can actually tolerate intake less than 200, which is like 1/10 of a teaspoon. Right? And be fine. If we take 1/10 of a teaspoon per day, we will be fine, we will operate well, we will be healthy. We'll look at some of the effects of very low salt intake in a minute. Our bodies would also tolerate very well 10,300 milligrams per day, which is like 5 teaspoons, and still be okay. There are countries where that's the normal intake. They take 5 teaspoons per day. And the population is not sick, right? So as we get older, our bodies naturally, the blood pressures increase. The veins, all sorts of things are happening in our body. Age is happening. And so your blood pressure generally increases with age. So we tend to become more salt sensitive with age. And there's that phrase again. So what that means is if we decide we're not having 1 teaspoon, we're going to have 1.5 teaspoons, which is, help my math here, 3,500, thereabouts. Then we find that instead of having a blood pressure of 120 on 80, our blood pressure would have probably gone up to 125 on 85. And that's simply because of the age and extra salt combination. And the reverse is the same. It's true. You would find patients who are consistently having blood pressures over 140 or 90. They're running 170 or 92 consistently. And we simply ask them, ensure you do the 1 teaspoon of salt, put it in the cup, mix it in, and use it up for the day. If you're cooking more than once for the day, you need to ensure that you leave some of that cup of water for your other meals, so you use it up throughout the day. And when we see them again, monitoring the blood pressures, you see that the blood pressure comes down, and it would come down from the 170 to 160 and from the 90 to 80. So the body responds very quickly to salt increase and decrease.
So I know we're not discussing hypertension specifically, but it is a sort of byproduct.
Yes, along with other things.
Along with other things. But you know, in St. Lucia, we focus a lot on the diabetes and hypertension as an appendage to that.
Right.
So in terms of how now is it merely just by consuming more than the recommended intake of salt that we now take ourselves into that hypertensive situation?
It's not just the sodium intake. We need to understand, we need to remember, not all the time, but just to have it in the back, that the sodium, where it works is at the level of the cell. And so you have one gate. And the key for that gate is insulin, which is why blood sugar is so closely linked to salt intake. And the insulin is what lets sodium in and out. But sodium is not the only thing that gate is there for. That gate is also there for potassium. And so that is why one of the things that we always encourage is low sodium intake, higher potassium intake. Not too much potassium, too much of anything is not good. But to monitor, it's easier to get sodium into your diet than potassium. So you have to be more aware of your potassium intake just because it's less readily available.
And so there has to be a very deliberate.
You have to deliberately
go to have that intake taken in.
That's right.
Now, you mentioned the salt sensitivity many times. Explain to us, if you could just break it down for us, what does that really mean?
There are 2 groups of people. One group is salt resistant, so they can eat as much salt as they want. It would not affect their blood pressure, their immune system, their stomach, it wouldn't affect them. And then we have the other group of people who are salt sensitive. So when you consume salt, your body responds to it quickly. So an example is, when we were growing up, there's this plant that when you touch it, it closes the leaf, right? So the salt-sensitive people are like that. You get a little bit of salt, and it acts. The salt-resistant people would just take forever to respond to that stimulus. So it's kind of like that. So you get the salt into the system, and the body responds. Some of the things that sodium does to the body, it affects more than just your veins and your hearts and your blood vessels. So that's why we focus on sodium intake so much, because many studies have shown that when we stay within the normal range, which would be more than 1/10 of a spoon, but less than 5 grams, which would be 2 teaspoons. Try to stay less than 2 teaspoons. When you stay within that range, you are so much healthier on so many levels. increased salt intake, for instance, increases your chances of stomach cancer. Very rarely do people think of salt and cancer in the same.
Yeah, we associate cancer really with sugars.
We associate the cancer with sugars instead. But remember, the key to open the gate for sodium, potassium, calcium is insulin. So if you have the insulin busy working on something else, it won't be able to focus on the blood sugars. So then you have stomach cancers. You have autoimmune conditions that are also affected by excessive salt intake, things like multiple sclerosis, and just weaker immune system. So you're always catching a cold, you always have a yeast infection, you always have headaches, another thing that is associated with salt. And then kidney disease. Now, globally, there's an issue with diabetes and poor control of diabetes and kidney failure. But salt has a very big part to play in it. So when we take in too much salt, we actually shutting down some of the functions of the kidneys and causing it to go into failure. And then there is stroke and heart attack. And there were a few studies done that found that just by reducing the salt to the 1.5 teaspoons per day, millions of lives could be saved. And of course, it's a lot less expensive because you don't have MS to deal with. The governments don't need to be paying those who are medically retired because of illness. So it's a global issue. And it really, really does come down to consumer education. One person, one label, your decision you're making, what am I putting into my body?
Yeah, and you have to do the balancing act.
You have to do the balancing.
On the other side of that, you have the implications of low sodium.
Too little sodium.
Yes.
So this, I don't remember, because it's kind of hard in our society, the way we were brought up, to get to too little salt. So it's not one of the things that I would readily keep in mind. But some of the effects of too little salt would be increased cholesterol. So you have various types of cholesterol, and triglycerides is one that comes from fats that you consume in your meals. Your body is less able to deal with certain types of cholesterol if you have that less than 1/10 of a teaspoon of salt per day. So there are some people who would argue and tell me, Doc, I have to have salt, so if I don't have salt, I'll have problems. But for you to get to that point, you have to be consuming less than 1/10 of a teaspoon per day. And we will look at how, if you eat a healthy salad, you get that 1/10 of a teaspoon. You also have insulin levels increasing and obesity, because you need more insulin to unlock more gates for the sodium. So your insulin levels go up. And when insulin levels go up, you have obesity becoming a problem, metabolic syndrome. So too much sodium can lead to those issues, and too little sodium can also lead to those issues. And of course, just low sodium, right? So that's an issue where you start having muscle weakness and different things like that, and cramps. So some patients complain of those things, and it's because probably they just drop the amount of sodium intake too quickly. So you kind of have to wean it off slowly and bring it down. Instead of taking all the salt and throwing it out in one day, look at 2 weeks to a month instead, and you cut down the amount of salt very slowly.
In terms of how do you now begin to, is it possible to reverse the salt sensitivity condition? Can you reverse that?
The salt sensitivity seems to be related to age, genetics, and ethnicity. So I don't think so. It doesn't seem to be reversible, because the factors that affect salt sensitivity and salt resistance are not variable. You can't change your ethnicity or your age. I mean, we can reverse our age theoretically.
You can begin to identify.
With diet and exercise, right? Theoretically reverse those numbers, but in actuality, no, it's not reversible. So
the important thing is to be able to stick with what is recommended.
That's correct.
Now, can your body begin to tell you that, hey, if you've eaten something and perhaps you've gone over that threshold, does the body react, and how does the body react to too much of an intake?
Okay, so when you start to cut down on the amount of salt, the first place that becomes very aware of salt intake is your mouth and your tongue. When you eat something, as soon as it gets into your mouth, instead of tasting the food, you taste the salt, and you'll be like, okay, this thing has too much salt. If you don't spit it out, because you don't want to be rude of where you are, and you swallow, you would have excessive salivation. It will probably burn while it's going down the throat. And maybe if you consume the entire meal and had too much salt or more than what you're accustomed to, you'd most probably develop a headache within a matter of minutes to hours. So your body is like, hey, what's this? So it does respond to it. But you have to get to that range of the 1 teaspoon a day to allow your body to be that sensitive to alert you that you have consumed too much salt.
Now, I love our people. Our people, we always can justify just about anything. So if you take in too much salt, it's all right. You could just go ahead and drink water. Just drink water. It will be okay.
Coconut water. And there's science behind that one.
Well, yes, the science behind the coconut water. So we need to get to that. But is it okay for you to, just go way over what the recommended intake is? So you probably have a saltfish, and that saltfish is so salty that you can't even sit straight when you're eating it. But because that's the nature of who we are with our fig, it's okay. And then you just drink water, and that will solve the problem.
In that instance, if it's a one-off situation, but it never is, but if it is a one-off situation, the person didn't reboil and reboil and reboil the saltfish to take out sufficient salt, and you eat that, yes, if you drink the coconut water and excessive water and then you run around, you may get rid of it, but in the long term, there would still be damage. So it would be better at that time. Unfortunately, in a developing country, we would have to probably give that batch of saltfish to the dogs.
Yeah, we would have to do that.
Yeah.
Poor dogs.
For the sake of our, for the sake of our health, yes. But the other option would be to split it up in portions and prepare something else with it. Do a small portion and use it in a broth, and don't add any salt to that broth, because that saltfish is already too salty and it's already prepared and you didn't want to throw it away.
And you want to throw it away.
Yeah.
So we have to do that. So never in all one sitting, and that's important.
Yes.
So if you divide it for the day, so 3 meals a day, and you decide to have this salted food 3 times in the day, does it still equate?
It's just as bad. Yeah, because remember, for the entire day, it's the 1 teaspoon. So if you decide, okay, this is like 5 teaspoons, so let me split it up into 5 meals and I'll have it all today. For today, you've had too much.
Because you understand that our people believe that when you are, a meal is just in that particular time. So the body would have gotten, digested that and everything. So the next time I eat, it's a new... Yeah, it's almost like a new day. Every time you go to eat, it's like a new day. So that was important for us to be able to clarify that in a sitting of a meal. And even if you were to divide that up, you are still doing that irreparable harm to the body.
That's right.
In terms now of just being able, you talk about the coconut water. Let's get to the coconut water, because we love it. It's good. And then it's not so good.
Not too much.
So talk to us about its goodness and the other side of it.
Okay, so coconut water has lots of electrolytes in it. A lot of people know that phrase because there are so many energy drinks on the market right now. So it rehydrates you quickly, and it has potassium and a bit of iodine and sugars that are not added sugars. It's natural sugars.
It's the sort of good stuff that you don't normally get through any chain of food, you'll be able to get that with your coconut water.
Yes, so it's one of the whole foods bracket sort of stuff. It's you get it as you drink it from the tree, you take it in, right? There's no food label attached to that. So it's good for you because then it has the potassium, because we're talking about sodium today. It has the potassium that actually helps get sodium out of the cells, out of the body, and to pass out through the urine and the sweat. So it actually helps your body get rid of extra sodium. So that's why coconut water is good. But because we've been pushing coconut water for a little bit, I have encountered people who drink an entire 1.5 liter bottle of coconut water on a daily basis. Now, that's the same issue when we say everything in moderation. Your serving of coconut water should be 1 glass of coconut water. So we're talking about probably 200 to 300 ml, 400 ml. You can push it max 500 ml per day. That's it. That's one of the little blue water bottles, right? But 1.5 is too much potassium. And so what the potassium does is, while it's getting the sodium out of the cell, it actually causes your cells to help contract. So what's happening every time your cells contract harder, we're talking about the heart, it can cause some serious heart problems. So please, I mean, I love the coconut, guys, I do. But people, if you're drinking, if you have a 1.5 liter bottle of water, it's enough for you to share with 3 friends, 2 friends at work. 4 people can drink out of that bottle. And keep it in the fridge. Share it at home with a family. Don't drink the whole bottle by yourself. And then tomorrow you buy another big bottle. That's just too much. Too much sugar, too much potassium. It's just too much.
I'm going to ask this. I know it's not in keeping, but the pairing it with the alcohol, it's something that we see that so often. Just as a by the way, while we are there, how does that play out? What are the effects of that?
From my understanding, and I'm not a nutritionist or a scientist, so my understanding is probably just like a layman's understanding. Because of the sucrose, that's the fructose, sorry, that's in the coconut water, it actually helps deliver the alcohol very readily to the liver. So it's like, instead of taking a bicycle to get from VG to Shock, somebody had a Lamborghini and they take you from VG to Shock. So it just gets the alcohol to the liver very quickly. So then that is why it's not a good idea to drink it. Although for people who do mix the coconut water with alcohol, they seem to like it and they feel fine, and they're like, yeah, when I drink it like that, I don't get up with a headache the next morning. But the effects are more harmful on the body when it's consumed with the coconut water as a chaser.
Takes away the barriers. So help us now, let's get into the labels.
Right.
And help us understand what we should be looking out for.
Okay, so before we get to the item, let's look at something that we would probably do at home on a daily basis. So we had breakfast this morning. You have 2 slices of toast, and then you pack it with a little ham, and then you pack it with cheese, and you put some mustard on top. So if we can get to the next slide, we will see the amount of sodium that sandwich would actually have, right? And each slice of bread has 200 milligrams of sodium. Now, that in itself is not too bad. But if you make a sandwich like my brother would make a sandwich, it would not have 2 slices of bread.
Like we know Miguel does.
Okay, well, yeah. So you would probably put 2 slices of bread on top, 2 slices of bread at the bottom, and 1 in the middle, right? So that's 1,000 milligrams already, okay? And then you pack it with the ham, and you not put 1 slice of ham. You have to put a few slices of ham so you can taste it. And then you put 2 slices of American cheese, and then you put the mustard, and you top it up with some pepper. And I mean, the pepper in itself is not bad, because you put lettuce in there, and you put tomato in there, and you put cucumber in there, and you probably put some pickles. All of these things add a little sodium to it. So instead of that sandwich, You can have another sandwich, which people would probably roll their eyes at you and take your 2 little slices of bread and slap some peanut butter in it and toast it, and that's a day. Maybe do an open-faced sandwich, you know? So now that we've looked at, let's see what we can and how we can do it. So we go into the supermarket now. Let's look at the label.
Okay.
So we have a label here that is color-coded. To the other image, please. And on the other label that's color-coded, we would see that you have this section on the side that's in blue that says, it's another rule of thumb, right? If it's less than 5%, you're okay. If it's more than 20%, then you're not okay, right? So that's the daily value. That's how much you're supposed to take in for your day. So if you're consuming something that has 59% of the daily value, and I know some drinks on the market that have that amount of sugar, it's 59% for your day in one drink. Then, excuse me, that means for the rest of your day, you kind of on a really tight rope. So it's better if you consume something that's less than the 20% or closer to the 5% to allow you to be able to munch on other things throughout the day. So the orange section, we're looking at the nutrients, and they're usually on top, the sodium and the fats. You want to consume closer to 5% of these during the day. And then you have the pink ones, which are at the bottom, which are your vitamins and minerals that you would want to have closer to the 20% for the day. Still not more than the 20, right? Even though they're good for you. You still don't want to have more than the 20 in those. So on the, I pulled up a label from another product. So let's go to a regular label that's not color-coded. Okay. So we go through this label, and unfortunately I didn't get the ingredients in this picture, because some of these things you'd see the disodiums and trisodiums in the label, and we see the amount of saturated fat is 30%. So you know off the bat, because of our rule of thumb, it's more than 20, so we would probably look for another item.
You have to
on the
discard
shelf.
that.
We're not using this one. But to go down and focus on the sodium that we're talking about today, the sodium content is 49%. Now, you have to take that 49% with a grain of salt. Pun
Literally?
intended. Because there are various societies that are looking out for this whole sodium issue in the world. You have the Diabetes Association, you have American Heart Association, you have the Nutritionist Association. I have a list of the names here. But all of those have their group of scientists working on it. And the amount of sodium that we should be taking in, they're saying that the 1 teaspoon is a bit liberal. So the 1 teaspoon is actually the maximum. If you can have 3/4 of a teaspoon, would be much better. So if you look at the percentage, the 3/4 of a teaspoon is actually 1,500 milligrams of salt per day. Simple, you don't even have to use a calculator. If what we should be taking in for good heart health and diabetes and kidneys, and from the nutritionists, they're pushing the 1,500 in comparison to the 2,000 or the 2,300, it is impossible for 1,130 milligrams to be 49% of 1,500. It's closer to like 75% of it. You could just see it with your eyes. So you don't necessarily need to remember all these numbers, but the 49% is actually based on the higher end. So the food industry is still basing theirs on the highest end of what the societies, the health societies are actually asking for. If they were to look at the 1,500 milligrams, then the percentage of sodium would just appear so much on the label that they would choose not to do that, right? If we look at another label, I got a second label that we can look at. I can't remember what, this is corned beef. The first one was a ramen noodle because of my little experience
with your
yesterday.
daughter.
So a ramen noodle, sorry, this one is corned beef. And the corned beef says that it has 36% sodium. And just knowing rule of thumb is more than 20, we're not going for that one, right? We'd have to choose another type of corned beef or get ground beef. Fresh products, fresh meat products always has less sodium than processed and canned products. Easy to remember. And this one I had to pull up. This is from a food chain because we know, okay, so we're not buying canned foods. But when I go to a fast food place.
Next slide.
Next image, please. When I go to a fast food place or I go to a restaurant, how do I know how much sodium I'm getting in? It is actually readily available. You can simply Google nutritional facts of Subway, nutritional facts of Domino's, nutritional facts of KFC. You can do it and you can find the information. It's online because they actually have to put the information out. They're mandated to do so. It's my business that I didn't go and look it up, right? So this is from one of our fast food chains, and this for me was a little too cumbersome, so I simplified it. So we'll go to the last image where I just removed everything to clear it up. So if you look at, and I don't know if it lines up properly, the biscuit, because that's Church's biscuits. I am sorry, that's one of my weaknesses. But the biscuit here is 580 milligrams of sodium. So, and not many people would just go in and take one biscuit. They would take 2 biscuits and a drumstick and something else and fries, and it all adds up, and the sauces and all of these things which are loaded with sodium. So that in and of itself, if we want to look at labels and learn labels, we look at the daily values and we look at the percentages just as a guide. If it's more than 20%, we put it back on the shelf. If it's closer to 5%, 7%, it's okay, right? And that's for the sodium. When you look at the label, there's also usually potassium on the label. Sometimes it's right below the sodium, and sometimes it's down in the bottom in the pink section where you had the nutrients
along
that you
the
want
vitamins,
more of.
yeah.
So what I had taught some of my patients to do is you look at your sodium percentage and your potassium percentage, and you compare those two with the items on the shelf. And once you get a product that you know, okay, these guys have less sodium, their sodium count is close to 5%, and that guy is, and this same product has potassium probably about 8 or 9 or 10%, you would take that in comparison to another product which is the same thing, let's say cornflakes, whatever it is, and the potassium is 2% and the sodium is 23%. You would take the one with less sodium and a little more potassium. And you although you need to keep checking your labels all the time, I find once you find a product that is within that range, you have probably about leg room of about 6 months before you have to check that product again, right? So you keep checking your labels. And you take your time in the supermarket. I know men have a serious problem with us in the supermarket.
Yes.
But
why are you reading it? Can't you just buy it? Don't you know what you want? Just pick it up.
No. So what you can do is, while at home, that's what I do. I leave the product on the table. So you can take your time and read it while we're at home. So you read, and he's like, oh my goodness, look at this. So there's a salad dressing. Salad dressing is another one that we should probably be making at home. Use our own olive oil, our 0 sodium garlic and 0 sodium lemon juice and vinegar, and mix it up and make our own salad dressing. There are some salad dressings on the shelf with 0 sodium. You can find it. Take your time and find it. But then there are others that have in excess of 600 milligrams. So it's really, really, really about taking your time in the supermarket and reading the labels. And if you really don't have the time for that because you're too busy, your husband in a rush, you have to get somewhere, you're the man doing the shopping and you're just not bothered about it, take whole foods instead. Instead of buying corn in the can, you go to the frozen section and you take your frozen fresh corn. You buy fish in the market instead of buying canned fish and canned tuna fish. You buy fresh cuts of meat instead of buying canned meat and sausages. So it's easier when you go the way of whole foods to get lower sodium intake. Something that we discuss with the patients as well is when you're trying to stay away from the amount of sodium, there are certain things that are considered high sodium. Cucumber is one of them, and it's
cucumbers, really?
I will
high
explain.
sodium. Okay.
I will explain.
Because that's like my favorite.
No, but I will
Don't
explain.
hurt my heart now.
No, it's good news. It's
Good news, great.
So, although cucumber is one of the high sodium vegetables, cucumbers would actually have in them, I think it's 0 to 85 milligrams of sodium. And it's considered high sodium simply because it's a fresh vegetable. Because fresh vegetables are usually 0. Tomatoes have 0. Pork loin, fresh cuts of pork, 54 milligrams.
Really?
So,
Say that
yes,
again.
Fresh cuts of pork has 54 milligrams of sodium, 3 ounces of fresh. So we're talking about a hand size, palm size piece of pork.
Increasingly, I'm beginning to change my thoughts on pork because, again, growing up, how terrible pork is. But I've had certain, sit-down sessions with doctors. Remember, one of my doctors said to me, he said, you need to, take in pork. And I said, pork? No, doc, absolutely not. It is not good. How can you? We were recommending this to me. And he laughed and he said, what makes you think that pork is so demonized? Why?
The thing is, trans fats and unsaturated fats and monounsaturated fats and unpolyunsaturated fats were being pushed by the food industry. But we found that those types of fats are actually more dangerous than saturated fats that you would get in animal products from your cheese and your milk and your pork and your beef. And those things are actually low in sodium and have none of those processed fats that are harmful to the body. So, the list of things like chicken and beef and egg whites and all these things have all less than 100 milligrams of sodium in them. And your broccoli and carrots and cucumbers and eggplants and tomatoes and watermelons, all these things are like 0 sodium, right? And then we have to compare with fresh shrimp, which is 101 milligrams of sodium.
Oh.
Compared to your packaged shrimp, which is 800 milligrams of sodium. Same product.
Oh.
So you just really have to choose if it's coming from nature, packaged as it is from nature, it's probably better for you. Yes, it is.
Better. No, because we hear that, and again we talk about the farmers adding salt when they're growing our ground provisions and that sort of fertilizer. So we hear that they add in the salt to the foods. Do you know does that affect us in any way in terms of our sodium intake at all? Because the food as it is naturally has that sodium. So when that all of that is added, the fertilizers and so forth, as they say, the farmers are adding salt. Does that affect?
The salts, and this is not a scientific point of view. The salts that the farmers add into the soils that they use as fertilizers are salts that would probably be already found in the soil. So there are many nutrients, salts that you get in soil that the food that our produce use as nutrients. And when they add it to the soil, it's really to actually just balance, because the soil is being used over and over again to allow the soil to remain nutritious for the plants. So when the salts are being added to the soil to feed the plants, you will still not get a cup of watermelon having 500 milligrams of sodium. Your cup of watermelon will still have 0 milligrams of sodium in it. The issue is, if it looks like the farmers are adding salt to whole foods, then why bother with whole foods? We might as well go buy the packaged foods. So it's just marketing.
That's the thing. And it all boils down to the consumer education and awareness.
That's right.
I want to thank you so much, Dr. Jenny Isaac. We've been speaking with you then. As I said, we were going to have a mini class, and yes, indeed, we do. And you are working alongside the Ministry of Health in this Salt Awareness Week, but you are with U Med Clinic.
Oh, yes.
I just wanted to point that out as well. So thank you so much for coming through. It has been an absolutely eye-opening session. I've done a little shaking, so that's good. I hope that the information has been helpful to you as well. Now, tomorrow, Friday, we'll be speaking with Mrs. Lisa Hunt-Mitchell from the Chief Nutritionist in the Ministry of Health, Wellness, and Elderly Affairs. She's going to be here, and we'll be talking as where we've left off. She's going to be picking up on all of the foods and how do you create that balanced diet and so forth. It's going to be another wonderful session. I want to thank you so much, St. Lucia, for those of you who are on island and those of you in the diaspora as well for tuning in. I'm Lisa Joseph. See you next time.